Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about some fantasy romances that I have read this year, and I'm going to let you know if they're worth your time. Basically, I'm just going to be reviewing these because I read these at a time when I wasn't making a lot of content, and I just wanted to talk to you about them. But first of all, I think it's important for me to say what I'm looking for in a fantasy romance. So one of the most important things, obviously two of the most important things, is great world building for the fantasy and a great romance. So I would say that I like those to be equally weighted, and if one of them is going to be lacking, then the other one has to really come through and pull it up for me. And even then, it's probably still not going to get a great rating, because I truly believe if the world building isn't strong, unique, interesting, what is the point of a fantasy romance? You know, like, I'm not just here for swords in a contemporary setting. Like, I want the fantasy world to be good. So I do put a lot of emphasis on that, because I feel like it's very important. So that being said, let's get into them. So I have a couple of books here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 8 books we're going to talk about. So the first one is A Court This Cruel and Lovely. I've been hearing a lot of hype about this one. I know a lot of people who really, really love this one. And I was also very charmed when I started this book. So this book follows our heroine who lives in this settlement where the gods have kind of taken over everything, and they have stripped any humans of any power that they may have had, so that you are not allowed to be a human with any like magical powers or anything like that. It's a fate that will condemn you to death, basically. They are able to test for that, and it's very dangerous for you to have any power because they're supposed to have stripped it from you at birth. So this book kind of reminded me, not necessarily in the story, but in some of the interactions between the hero and heroine, and in the writing style of a Jennifer L. Armentrout. And I used to really, really love her. I haven't loved any of her newer stuff, but years and years ago, I freaking loved and adored her and ate her up. And by years and years ago, I mean like the Obsidian series from like 10 years ago, you know? So I do appreciate her, and I see why she's so popular. That writing style is really what made this book, I think, not work for me, because it's sort of a blend of very, very snarky, very quippy dialogue, which can be fine, which can be very fun, and then some very modern anachronisms are in here. Like, the one line I remember the most is, "Mercenaries got a mercenary," and I was just like, I just hate it. I don't necessarily hate that, but I do not like that when it is like side by side with something that is going for this feeling of maybe like a Renaissance type of setting, where you have phrases also of like "unhand me" or "my good lady," like things like that. I just don't like that. So I didn't love the writing style. I was very caught up with this book in the beginning. You know, our heroine ends up getting caught with some magic, and she has to escape her town, and in doing so she meets this stranger, this mercenary on the road, who has green eyes, this man, and she realizes he is the man she has been dreaming about for a long time, and he leaves her for dead on the side of the road. You know, she has to try and survive out there on her own in this very brutal world while people are trying to hunt her down and kill her. And she does so pretty successfully. She has some mishaps along the way, and then she ends up meeting up with this mercenary again, and they make a deal that he will help her get out of the town safely if she will do something for him as well. So now they're in close proximity, of course. They've already established that they don't like each other, that they hate each other, even though she's had these haunting dreams of him. And I didn't really love the progression of their romance, if I'm going to be honest. I felt like it was a little bit contrived. And that is something that is often a criticism of mine with fantasy romance. So often we use these fantasy tropes or settings or things that are familiar to give this feeling that we want of forced proximity or danger or enemies or whatever, but a lot of times it can feel contrived, very much like an author putting her Barbies together in a situation. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of how I felt with this one. But I will say, I see the appeal of this. I see that it's fun. I think if you are going into something and you kind of like Jennifer L. Armentrout's writing style, and you know, what I've talked about appealed to you so far, I think that you would like this too. I didn't love this, and I gave it 2 stars. Okay, so now on to my favorite fantasy romance of the year. I read this as soon as it came out. I was very in love with it, and I still remain in love with it to this day. However, it is definitely not perfect, and I feel like it's got very mixed reviews at this point, but I freaking loved it. and it is When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. So I loved this book. From the beginning of when I read this book, I was completely captivated. I love the world building in this. It is very unique, and it is very well thought out. I love the characters. I love the setup. I like that the romance in here is very, 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 very slow building right up until the very end. I like the concept of maybe like past lives and how that love might influence people in their life today. I just freaking loved this. I'm going to tell you what it's about, and then I'm going to tell you some of the cons so you can decide if it's worth it to you, because it is quite a long book. So this book is basically about, in this world, there are dragons, and when dragons die, they go up into the sky as a moon, and sometimes those moons can fall and shatter, and so you have like moon shards that people can find that are the remains of dragons who have passed away and fallen from the sky. And our heroine, our main character, she is basically an assassin working for a rebel base, and she ends up getting captured, and she is going to be used as a political ploy in the opposing side of the world at that time. Now enter our hero, who is basically going to be a king, and he finds her. He's there for other reasons at the prison. He's not a prisoner, he's at the prison. He sees her in a cell, and he recognizes something in her that has kind of left him shook, because he is deep in mourning, and he can't really believe that, I recognize something about her. Is she somebody that meant the world to me? So he feels completely drawn to her the whole time. There are a lot of plot actions in this book, things that propel the story forward that I think are spoilery, so I'm not going to really get into that. But they end up not necessarily teaming up, but kind of traveling together. Our heroine is very stubborn. She is very, very stubborn, and she is also a little bit snarky and very independent, very strong-willed. You know, she's sort of forced into that situation, into that type of a personality, you know? So she's not very quick or easy to trust Khan, our hero. And I just have to say, again, I loved this book so much. You know, there are, in any time that we read a book, we have tolerances, things that we will tolerate, because every single book has some flaws. It doesn't matter what it is, you know, and our tolerance scale really determines, am I going to be able to overlook that and get into the story, or am I not going to? So the book I mentioned previously, you know, some of the anachronistic language, some of the contrived nature of the romance really made, like, I had very little tolerance for that. One of the things about this book that I think is a drawback is the overwrought writing style. Like, purple prose is an understatement, and sometimes I think that her prose is so beautiful and very, very, all of her prose in here is thoughtful, but oftentimes it can be a bit overwrought. I think that sometimes she goes a little too hard, and I know that that is definitely a stumbling block for a lot of people, but I'm of the opinion that if you're going to err when it comes to prose, I would much prefer an author to err on the side of trying too hard instead of not trying hard enough. And I feel like she was really, really doing some wonderful things with her prose in here, and sometimes she overshoots it, it becomes overwrought prose, leans heavily on the purple prose, but honestly, I still really loved it and found it to be beautiful. Another thing that I think is a drawback of this book for some people, again, it wasn't for me, is that the world building is complicated. It's very complex. It's not laid out for you. She's not spoon-feeding you anything in here. She's giving you just enough information to lead you to the end. She's not spelling everything out for you. And again, that's something that I very much can respect and admire about an author, because I love that. I don't want to be told everything. I want to be able to make connections. I don't want to feel like you're spoon-feeding me stuff. That's one of the biggest things that will get me to DNF a book, is when an author sort of insults my intelligence and acts like they need to tell me everything. Like, I can put the pieces together, you know? So this book does require a good amount of work, a good amount of commitment. I read this physically. The audio wasn't out at the time. And one of the ways that she builds her world is she has a glossary in the beginning that is full of history of the world, terms, what the different dragons do, some things that have happened in the past, and that's probably not the best way to get world building to your reader, because I do feel like I read that first and I ate it up because I'm a giant nerd and I love history and things like that. But I could see how other readers might not like that. So for me, this is everything that I've been looking for in a fantasy romance for a very long time. It's very fresh, it's very unique, it's very romantic, it's a little bit tragic in places, and I loved it. It's very emotional. I loved it. So not a perfect book, perfect for me, and I do recommend it. I really do. Okay, the next book that I want to talk about is A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle Jensen. So this is the beginning of a new series. It's based in like Norse mythology, and I was very, very excited about that because I love Norse mythology, and I have enjoyed this author's previous books. I've only read The Bridge Kingdom by her, but I really liked it. So I know she's a very solid author, and I think that the setup in here is really well done. So we basically have our heroine who is married to a lord at the time, and she doesn't really want to be married to him. She's sort of against her will. Her life is basically her catching and cleaning fish. But she is actually a shield maiden, where she has some of the god's blood in her. She's very magical in that way, and she is going to make sure that whoever's kingdom side that she is on will not fail, that she's going to be a powerful weapon in that way. So pretty soon, right off the bat, we see she's in this unhappy marriage, and then in comes this neighboring like Jarl, I guess, and his son. She's instantly captivated by his son. He's this big, powerful, beautiful man, and for the first time she feels like desire and something that isn't just disgust about men because her husband is so terrible, you know? So she ends up, her current husband ends up just sort of like trading her, giving her to this Jarl, and she ends up in this duel at the moment with the son. And that's when it's revealed that she has this shield maiden power, and she's going to be a very useful tool in the war. So that propels the whole story forward. And of course, the romance is between the son, even though there are so many things against them that make it seem like they will never be able to be together. Most of all, that she's married to, you know, not married to this one guy, now married to this king who is his father. So lots of situations to give you angst and things like that. I will say I loved the beginning of this book. I thought it was fantastic. I loved how the world was set up. I loved their first meeting. I thought it was very fun. I love the writing style. I love, love, love Norse mythology. But then right away, after they had met and had some interactions, they're fighting, they're doing some of those things, it really kind of went downhill. And that's, again, one of my personal pet peeves, is when the romance was just focused on how much they were lusting after each other. Like, we kind of lost any sense of tension there because it was all about how much they wanted each other. And it was just nonstop. And the plot also kind of meandered for me at that point as well. So I liked this one. I didn't love it. I was hoping to love it, and I gave this 3 stars. I think if you're a fan of Norse mythology, if you like a lot of angst and a lot of complicated, almost impossible situations for our couple to be together, I would recommend this. And also, if your tolerance or your preference is for lust-driven romances, then you may like this. Okay, the next one that I read is The Road of Bones. So this one was a very fun surprise. I really, really enjoyed this one a lot too. This is sort of a blend of like Viking mythology and fairy tales, and I had a great time with this one. So it begins with our heroine, who the queen has sent people to where the little settlement where she lives to kill her. Her dad has been keeping a secret about her for her whole life, and right before he is killed by the people who came to kill her, he tells her to follow the Road of Bones and go to the safe house that is at the end of it. She doesn't know what type of power she has or why the queen may be sending people after her, so then she starts on this journey on the Road of Bones to go and find the safe house. As she does that, she meets this band of warriors that is just a very fun found family type of thing where they end up meeting. She has a little bit of things to offer for them, but they don't really want to accept her into their band, but they do because, you know, they don't want to leave her alone. And she has Axis, who is the leader, and then one of his warriors who is very interested in her, like, romantically. And she's keeping a secret about who she is, if she has any power, and what she's doing there because she's in so much danger and she doesn't want to put them in danger. I really enjoyed this. I thought this had such great vibes. I thought the writing was really good. I loved all the characters. I felt like this was very unique. I loved that our romance sort of only is one of those that you think it's going to be this romance and then it ends up being something else. And it really kind of doesn't take off until the end, but you see the thread of it starting to build throughout the way. I thought that the world was very interesting. It was very well built. I really enjoyed this one and I had a fun time with it. I gave this one 4 stars and I would recommend this one for sure. The next book that I read is Where the Dark Stands Still. So this one is actually a YA fantasy romance, but it's featuring something that I deeply love, and that is basically Polish mythology. So this one has our main character, our heroine, who ends up in a situation where she has used her magic in this woods, this magical woods, and it has caused some dire circumstances to happen. And when she uses it, the Leshy of the wood, who's sort of like the demon master of the wood, notices that she's the one who used the magic, and he catches her and makes a deal with her that she has to stay there for a certain amount of time before she can be free. And all of this is them, like, interacting. This is a very slow-paced book. The prose in this was really beautiful, really well done. There's not a lot of plot to speak of here, but the world was so unique, and the fact that, like, our love interest is this Leshy, it was very, very interesting. I had a really fun time with this, but it also wasn't completely fulfilling, and I think that's because most of it stays on the surface level, and I think that this really had such a great setup and such great ideas and such great world building that it could have gone a little bit deeper, and also just the situation with the heroine I think could have gone a little bit deeper too. So I liked this one. I gave it 3 stars, and I think if you're looking for a unique fantasy romance with some sweet romance and unique world building, I would definitely recommend this one. Okay, so now the next one are 2 books that I'm going to combine into one, and it is Spark of the Everflame and Glow of the Everflame. So this is the Kindred's Curse saga, and there is a 3rd book out, and then the 4th book is coming out this month, I believe. I haven't finished the 4th book. I kind of put it on hold for a little bit because I was getting a little overwhelmed at how long that it is. The third book. Did I say 3rd or 4th? I don't remember. The 3rd book is the one I'm currently reading. It's quite long, but this fantasy romance series I think is definitely worth your time. This is very, very, very fun. It's very unique. It has a lot of great depth and nuance to the characters. I think the romance setup is really fantastic, and I had a really good time with this overall. So the first book I didn't like quite as much as the second book. The second book I think really put this into something that was like, okay, this is a series to watch. This is a series to really love and enjoy and look forward to future releases, although I think that there's only one, and then I think the series will be done. But this author is very good. Very good. She knows exactly how to write a fantasy romance in a way that readers are wanting. She creates tension in her romances really well. She has a really good way of building her world and getting that information to you as a reader without feeling like you're just getting constantly info dumped on, or that you're kind of left floundering and you don't really know what's happening. I really enjoyed this. So this begins with our heroine, who at this point in time, like, the land, the world, has been colonized, and demigods are put into positions of power, and humans are very much looked down on. So our heroine's mother works at the palace, and she ends up going missing. Before she goes missing, our heroine learns a secret about her past that she thinks she can use to find out what happened to her mother, where her mother went. And this also puts her into the royal palace, sort of taking her mother's position and working with the royal family. Now, the king is dying, and his heir to the throne is keeping an eye on our heroine and is kind of watching her every move, and there is some really great tension between the two of them. This, again, has a case of she has this romantic relationship with somebody, but you don't think it's going to be the end game, and the person that she's in this relationship with is working for, like, the rebels, who's going to come in and basically try and destroy the royals and put the descendants, you know, down so humans cannot be subjugated as much as they are. So I really enjoyed this. I thought this was very clever. I thought this was very unique. And most of all, I think this was just very fun. Like, I listened to these audiobooks and I was just eating them up. I couldn't stop reading them. I thought this was just a really good fantasy romance series. I think if you're looking for a new fantasy romance series and you haven't read this one, I would highly recommend it because it's very fun. And I think that everything about it is pretty much done perfectly. Heavy on political intrigue. We have some magical creatures, some dragons, some griffins. I think maybe they're called gryverns or something like that. Like, it's fun. It's very fun. And I had a really good time with this, and I'm very much looking forward to finishing the series. Okay, so now the last book that I have to talk about is The Curse of Saints. So this is a fantasy romance that I really didn't know anything about. This is also quite thick. I think pretty much all of these books, maybe not all of them. The YA I don't think is on Kindle Unlimited, but most of these books you can find on Kindle Unlimited. So this one we have our heroine, who is working for the queen as basically an assassin. She's a spy master, and we have warring kingdoms, of course, in this one. And basically the hand of the queen, or her first in line in authority, is Will, and that is the sworn enemy of our heroine. But of course, there's feelings there, you know, even though, of course, we love that enemies to lovers in fantasy romance. So our heroine and Will end up forced to work together, but some tragedy strikes, and it's made clear that our heroine actually has these dark hidden powers that nobody knew about that make her very, very dangerous and also useful. So again, a lot of these books, as I'm talking about them, I can see definite similarities. So I liked this one a good bit more than I liked A Court So Cruel and Lovely. I gave this book 3 stars. I thought that the setup between our romantic leads was more interesting. I thought like the political aspect and the political maneuvering was more interesting here. This is definitely a book that we've seen before. And I will say one of the big drawbacks I had with this book is just the vast amounts of info dumping, like non-stop info dumping. This is probably, out of all the books I've been talking about here, this one is the worst at that. It literally just constantly does it. And I am kind of surprised that I made my way through it because that's a big pet peeve of mine. But I really enjoyed this book. I had a fun time reading it. I didn't enjoy all of it. Parts of it felt like a slog, but it was worth the read for me, and I think I will pick up the sequel, so I gave this 3 stars. And if you like enemies to working together to falling in love and political maneuvering, I think you would like this as well. And also like a heroine with secret dark powers that could basically destroy the world, give this one a try. So alright, there you have it. Those are some fantasy romances that I have read recently and if I would recommend them or not. And yeah, let me know what your favorite fantasy romance that you have read recently is, and if you have made it this far in the video, please feel free to leave me the little fairy emoji, or the wizard, or a dragon, something fantasy, and I'll see y'all in my next video.